I overheard him one day, laughing about how much pets could liven up a house. It wasn't a long, drawn-out conversation, just a passing comment as he sat on the couch watching TV, but to me, it sounded like the answer to all of my problems. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. I immediately thought, this is what he wants. He loves animals. He wants more animals. I mean, I wasn't dumb, but I had been trying to figure out what made him tick for months. Something felt off in our routine, and maybe a little surprise would shake things up, right? So, I took it upon myself to bring more joy into our lives. I knew how important it was to keep the flame alive. Not that the flame was dying or anything, but you know, marriage needs spice. No one wants to be the boring couple who does nothing but Netflix and eat pizza. That's not us. I had it figured out. He would be so impressed by how far I'd go to keep him happy. All the great wives do crazy things, right? I wasn't about to let that stop me. The first stop was a pet store. Not just any pet store, mind you. The kind of place where the animals seem a little too enthusiastic. And that's when I saw him, the parrot. He was just sitting there, perched on his tiny, dingy little stand, squawking at anyone who came near. This bird had personality, you know? Like he was ready to be part of our family and bring some energy to our house. I thought it was perfect. So I bought him. I named him Sir Chatterbox. Why? Because I figured if he was going to talk, I wanted him to have an important name. I figured the bird would bond with my husband, and we'd all live happily ever after. I was wrong. The first day the bird arrived was a disaster. As soon as we brought him inside, he started swearing. Like, full-on vulgarity. The parrot yelled out, "Lazy Larry." Which, okay, it might have been a coincidence. But then, he looked at my husband and screamed, "You're pathetic!" My husband just stared at him. "I didn't teach him that," I insisted. "It's natural, I guess." But it wasn't. That bird had personality, and it was foul-mouthed. Every time my husband came into the room, the parrot would squawk something like, "Hey, dumbass!" and "Get your own damn snack." And yet, despite the insults, my husband kind of liked it. He would chuckle, shaking his head. "Your bird's a riot, babe," he'd say. Meanwhile, I was trying to teach Sir Chatterbox to say things like, "You're my love," or "You're amazing." But no. The bird had other ideas. He was a potty-mouthed parrot who made our house feel more like a brothel than a sanctuary of love. Still, I wasn't discouraged. I thought, he's just getting used to the new digs. A few days later, I figured maybe the parrot needed a buddy. You know, someone to be his sidekick, a little yin to his yang. So, I went all out and brought home a miniature pig. Not the cute, lazy kind that just lays around and grunts. Oh no. This pig was hyperactive. It was small enough to be a pet, but it had the energy of a toddler who ate too much sugar. It ran around the house, snorting, knocking things over, and rooting through drawers. And of course, it had no boundaries. None. It made itself at home on our couch, in our bed, everywhere. The pig's name? Sausage. A little on the nose, I know, but it felt right. The first night Sausage stayed with us, I woke up to him chewing on the comforter, making a mess. I'm talking shredded fabric everywhere. I tried to stop him, but he was faster than a toddler with a sugar rush. Then, the cherry on top? The pig jumped onto our bed while my husband and I were trying to have some quality time. The pig sniffed around, jumped on top of us, and knocked over the lamp. At that moment, I realized I might have gone too far. But no, I refused to accept defeat. I couldn't back down now. I had set a precedent. I had to prove that I could make all these weird animals work. So, the next day, I made a grand gesture. I planned the perfect evening to show my husband how thoughtful I was. We'd have a romantic dinner, just the two of us. And yes, the pets would be there too, because that's how much I loved him. I had to show him how much I cared, and he would love it. I set the table. Candles were lit, the wine was poured, and I thought, this is going to be amazing. But of course, the chaos began as soon as the parrot started squawking about sausages. Not even kidding, he screamed. Get that bacon away from me! Sausage, the pig, was rolling under the table, knocking over chairs. I tried to keep things under control, but the damn iguana, yes, I got one of those too, had somehow managed to crawl onto the husband's head. And the worst part? My husband was laughing. Not just a chuckle, he was full-on belly laughing. He found this hilarious. Are we really doing this? He asked, barely able to breathe from the laughter. I started to laugh too, but the whole thing just felt ridiculous. My loving gesture of more animals was quickly turning into the most bizarre night of our marriage. The parrot started yelling at Sausage, calling him a glutton, and Sausage decided that the dinner rolls looked like chew toys. Meanwhile, the iguana climbed the kitchen counter, knocking over the salt shaker. And that's when it hit me. I had lost control of the situation. The animals were running wild, and my husband was enjoying every minute of it. I had turned our house into a zoo, all because I thought I could keep him happy with quirky pets. But somehow, despite everything, he still loved it. He kept laughing, taking videos, and sharing them with his friends. The more chaos I created, the more he appreciated it. I had made an utter fool of myself, and my husband was eating it up. He liked my insane, animal-filled version of domestic bliss. And that's when I realized maybe, just maybe, I had gone a little overboard. But I'd never let him know that. So, after the chaotic dinner, I sat down next to him. What do you think? Too much? I asked, giving him a hesitant smile. He wrapped his arm around me and said, I love it. You're crazy, but in the best way. And just like that, I knew this wild, animal-filled mess was going to work. A few days after the parrot's grand entrance into our home, I began to wonder if I was really cut out for this whole animal thing. But then, my husband mentioned it again, how fun it would be if we had more pets. He wasn't complaining about the parrot. In fact, he kind of liked that it kept him on his toes. So, I decided I needed to take this whole pet game to the next level. I went online. I researched. And then I found it. The perfect addition to our family. An iguana. The ad said it would bring excitement to any household. So I thought, why not? A pet like that could really spice things up. I told myself it would be the perfect companion for Sir Chatterbox. It would give our home a touch of wild energy. I picked up the iguana that afternoon. The thing looked like a miniature dragon, complete with those eerie, almost glowing eyes. It hissed when I placed it into its new habitat, and I could already tell it wasn't about to be an easy pet. The first clue was when it decided that the best place to settle in was on top of the television, where it would make a habit of perching itself, staring directly at us while we watched movies. I mean, there's something unsettling about a reptile just glaring at you while you're trying to relax. But I rolled with it. I had this figured out. Maybe we'd get to the point where I could teach it some tricks, like the parrot. A few days in, and I thought it was becoming part of the family. I was wrong. It turns out iguanas don't respond to love and care like dogs or cats. They're independent. But hey, that's fine. I wasn't going to give up that easily. Every morning, I'd go into the living room and try to bond with the damn thing. And every morning, it would scurry off the moment I made eye contact, making a hissing sound like it was ready to attack. Meanwhile, my husband thought it was hilarious. It's like it's planning its escape route, he would joke. He was right. The iguana had a clear escape plan, and it was never going to bond with me. But despite all of this, I wasn't about to give up. I mean, this iguana wasn't just any pet. This was going to be a symbol of my dedication to my husband's happiness. And besides, the parrot was getting a little too comfortable in its role as the vocal troublemaker. I needed something bigger, something that would command attention. The iguana was that something. The night I decided to really make an impact was a disaster. I thought I could prepare a romantic dinner. This time, I wasn't going to go overboard like the last time with the pigs and the parrot's incessant swearing. Just a quiet evening with me, my husband, and my growing menagerie. But, of course, chaos found its way in. The iguana was roaming the house as usual, and somehow, it ended up in the kitchen, scaling the counter while I was cooking. At first, I didn't notice, but when I turned around, it was too late. It had knocked over a jar of peanut butter, which had then spread itself all over the countertops. In the middle of my confusion, my husband walked in, just in time to witness the absolute mess. "Well, looks like someone's hungry," he said, barely holding back laughter as the iguana stuck its tongue out, tasting the peanut butter, oblivious to the chaos it had caused. "That's not what I had in mind," I muttered, trying to clean up the mess, but the iguana wasn't having any of it. It scrambled away, leaving a trail of sticky peanut butter all over the kitchen floor. My husband just kept laughing. "Honestly, I think it's kind of cute. Like a chaotic pet," he said between chuckles. Great, I thought. The iguana was charming him now. This wasn't the wild, dynamic I'd imagined. I wanted romance. I wanted sexy date nights. But apparently my husband found the animals to be the perfect comedic entertainment. Trying to salvage the evening, I decided to bring out the wine. We would still have our romantic dinner. We could get through this. As I poured, the parrot started screeching from the living room. "You're pathetic!" it yelled. My husband stopped, mid-sip, and burst out laughing. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "I can't even drink without this bird insulting me." The insult was aimed at me, actually. But whatever. I tried to play it cool. "I thought it'd be funny to teach him some new phrases," I explained. "Yeah," he smirked. "It's definitely funny." Before I could respond, the pig wandered into the room. "Sausage out!" I called, but it was already snorting, trotting in, and knocking into the table, sending the wine glasses clattering to the floor. My husband looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was about to say something serious. But instead, he burst into laughter, almost falling off his chair. "I don't know if this is genius or madness," he said, wiping his eyes. "But it's definitely never boring." Of course it wasn't. Our home had transformed into a zoo, and I was the zookeeper. I'd created this mess, and he was just living it. I guess it was cute in its own chaotic way. But every time I thought we were about to have some quality alone time, another animal would come barreling through the door, or the parrot would interrupt with some lewd remark. There was no escaping the chaos. Later that night, I found myself sitting on the couch, trying to recover from the disaster. My husband sat beside me, the parrot perched on his shoulder, Sausage lying at our feet, and the iguana giving us the death stare from across the room. It was a full house. I turned to him and asked, "Are you, okay with this?" He paused for a moment before responding. "You know, I thought I was going to be the one telling you to slow down. But you've somehow made this into the most fun I've had in forever. I think you're a little messed up," I muttered, half laughing. But in that moment I knew. I had made some mistakes, sure. But my husband? He loved it. All of it. Every ridiculous bit of chaos. It was strange, but it worked for us. I just hoped the next animal I adopted would be a little less messy. Maybe a goldfish or something. Or, I could just stop while I was ahead. But I doubted it. The way he smiled every time he saw an animal wreak havoc just made me want to do more. I thought the iguana was the tipping point, but I was wrong. The tipping point came when I walked into the living room one morning to find my husband watching a video about exotic pets. And not just any exotic pets. No, he was absolutely captivated by an ad for a collection of spiders. Giant, fuzzy tarantulas that you could keep as pets. I froze. "Look at these, babe," he said, not even looking up at me as he scrolled through the page. "These are awesome. Imagine one of these bad boys in our living room. Wouldn't that be something?" I stood there, blinking, trying to process what I had just heard. He wasn't serious, right? We could barely keep the iguana under control, and now he wanted to bring a tarantula into the mix? I wasn't one of those women who freaked out over bugs. I had seen a few spiders in my life. I was no stranger to creepy crawlers. But this? A pet tarantula? I could already feel my stomach turning at the thought of those hairy legs skittering across my kitchen counter. I don't know, I replied, trying to hide the panic in my voice. I mean, we've already got all these other pets. Maybe we should take a breather for a while? But no, my husband was already on a roll. He was practically glowing at the idea. What if we had one of those big ones, you know? They're really chill, they don't need much care. He was practically drooling at the thought, completely ignoring how much chaos we had already created with our current animals. I sighed, figuring this was going to be yet another thing I couldn't talk him out of. The next day, he came home holding a small, barely contained cage. The words, Hercules Tarantula, were written on it in big, bold letters. Surprise! He exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. I thought we could name him Spidey, like Spider-Man. You know, because he's big and badass. I looked at the cage, and then back at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Oh, great, I muttered. Just what we needed. But of course, I couldn't back out now. He had been so excited. The last thing I wanted was to crush his joy. So, I took the cage and set it down in the living room, right next to the parrot's perch. At that moment, it became clear that I had made a grave mistake. It took me about 5 minutes to realize that no one in our household was going to be able to live in peace. The parrot immediately started squawking at the cage, yelling, "Oh no, not that thing! Get it out!" Meanwhile, the pig, who by now had developed a full-blown obsession with chewing on anything remotely new, had started nudging the cage with its snout. Sausage was delighted with his new target. You're kidding me, I muttered under my breath as the spider inside the cage made an attempt to escape. It had barely settled in, and already there was chaos. My husband, meanwhile, was busy watching the whole thing unfold with amusement, like this was some sort of bizarre sitcom. I think Spidey's fitting in well, he said, completely oblivious to the fact that the parrot had started yelling at the pig. The pig was attempting to break into the spider's cage, and I was already on the verge of a mental breakdown. Yeah, I said dryly. A perfect fit. I couldn't believe I was dealing with this. A freakin' tarantula. But there was no going back. My husband was already infatuated with the idea. And as much as I hated to admit it, I had to keep the show going. There was no turning back. This had become my life now, a parade of pets, each crazier than the last. The next morning, I found myself getting up early to feed the animals. As I entered the living room, I noticed something strange. The tarantula's cage was open. And not just open, * broken star. I immediately froze, panic flooding my chest. Had the iguana somehow knocked it over? Was the parrot involved? No. There was one culprit, Sausage. That damn pig had managed to pull the latch off the cage and somehow freed the spider. I frantically searched the room, heart pounding. Spidey? I called softly. Where are you, buddy? And then, to my horror, I spotted him. The tarantula was on top of the bookshelf, crawling toward the edge. I could feel my legs shaking as I sprinted over and grabbed it with a towel. Not today, buddy, I muttered, holding the spider carefully in my hands. I was so scared I could barely breathe, but somehow I managed to get the thing back into its cage. When I showed my husband what had happened, his reaction was not quite what I expected. That's amazing, he said, his eyes practically glowing. You caught him. That's some serious talent. I stared at him, dumbfounded. I was about to have a panic attack, and you think it's amazing? Well, yeah. It's like a real-life adventure. Look at you, being a hero and everything. I wasn't sure if I was more pissed off or amused, but in the end, I decided to laugh. Maybe I was losing my mind, but at least I knew one thing for sure: my husband was a wild card. And for some bizarre reason, he found this all incredibly funny. After that little incident, I thought maybe it was time to take a break. The spider and all the other animals were becoming more than I could handle. It was clear that we were living in a constant state of chaos, and I was barely hanging on. I started to talk about scaling back, taking some of the animals back to the pet store. But my husband wouldn't hear it. I think we've got the perfect setup, he insisted. I love it. You love it. Why would we change things? Because I can't breathe with all these animals, I said, laughing despite myself. But he wouldn't budge. I don't want to go back to normal. Normal's boring. This is our life now. Embrace it, babe. And so, there I was, completely overwhelmed by the animals I had brought into our lives. But strangely enough, I didn't want to give up. Not when my husband was having so much fun with it. Maybe it was madness, but it was our kind of madness. It was weird, it was chaotic, and it was definitely not what I had imagined when I set out to make our life spicy. But in its own way, it was perfect. The animals were here to stay, at least for now. It had been a few weeks since the tarantula incident, and I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I had reached my limit. I had somehow managed to get my sanity back after the spider chaos, and things had calmed down for a little while. But as with all things in our household, calm never lasts long. One night, I came home from running errands, feeling optimistic that I could finally enjoy a peaceful evening. When I walked through the door, I was greeted by the sight of my husband grinning like a Cheshire cat, holding yet another pet carrier. "Guess what I got?" he announced excitedly. I looked at him, unsure of what fresh madness this would bring. "What now?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "A hedgehog," he declared triumphantly. "Isn't it cute?" I stared at him, stunned into silence. "A hedgehog? Really?" He just nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, look. He's super tiny. His name is Prickles. He's gonna be our new best friend." I wanted to scream. My brain felt like it was about to short-circuit. "You're telling me we need another pet?" I asked, my voice slowly rising. "After everything that's happened, you think bringing in a hedgehog is the answer?" "Well, the thing is, he's so cute. And harmless. I figured we needed something more chill. You know, after the tarantula and the pig and the parrot. A nice, quiet pet." "Quiet? A hedgehog is quiet?" I repeated, incredulous. "You really think that is going to fix anything?" "Well, at least he won't knock over the peanut butter jars," he said, shrugging. He had a point, I suppose, but at this rate, we were going to have a house full of animals that didn't know the meaning of quiet or chill. Still, I couldn't exactly say no. I mean, I wasn't the one who had the most random ideas. So, there I was, standing in the middle of our living room, holding the hedgehog's tiny cage, preparing to take on yet another strange creature. By the time I finally agreed to the hedgehog, I had nearly convinced myself that it was just another phase. Another oddity to add to our household's growing collection of chaos. And, in truth, I wasn't sure whether I was excited or terrified. But I smiled at my husband, trying my best to act as though I was on board with the whole thing. "All right," I said, trying to sound supportive. "Let's meet this Prickles." He opened the cage, and out came the tiniest, most adorable little hedgehog I'd ever seen. He curled up in a tight little ball, only sticking out his nose and tiny paws. My heart melted. In a way, it was the cutest thing we'd gotten, but there was still a lingering sense of impending doom in my chest. Of course, it wasn't long before our other animals took an interest. The parrot immediately started squawking. "A new friend? A new snack!" and launched into a series of deranged insults directed at the poor hedgehog. The pig, naturally, started snorting and pawing at the cage, determined to figure out whether this new arrival could be eaten, played with, or worse, chewed up. The iguana, who had grown increasingly possessive of his corner of the living room, let out a hiss from the bookshelf, as though marking his territory. I swear I could feel the tension rising. And then, as if on cue, the hedgehog, Prickles, decided to explore. And by explore, I mean he immediately began rolling across the floor, like an unstoppable little ball of spiky energy, heading straight toward the parrot's cage. "No! Not there!" I shouted, diving after him, but it was too late. Prickles had already arrived, and within seconds, the parrot was screeching, flapping its wings in a panic, as though the hedgehog was an actual threat to its existence. "You've got to be kidding me!" I groaned, picking up Prickles before the parrot could start a full-blown meltdown. I looked over at my husband, who was laughing hysterically. "See? Isn't this great? It's like a little mini-adventure every day." "Yeah," I replied. "It's an adventure all right. In the same way that a car crash is an adventure." But despite the madness, I could tell he was genuinely enjoying himself. And deep down, I knew that my attempts to stop this madness were only prolonging the inevitable. This had become our life now. A life full of weird pets and even weirder situations. Over the next few days, I learned how to handle Prickles, but only just. The hedgehog had a fondness for getting into the smallest, most inaccessible places, wedging himself between the couch cushions, or rolling into corners where I'd almost forgotten about him. And every time I tried to get him out, my husband would joke. "He's a survivor. He knows how to hide from the chaos." And honestly, he was right. The hedgehog had figured out something that none of us could: how to keep calm in the storm. It wasn't long before we realized something. The house wasn't just full of animals. It was full of love, in its most chaotic, ridiculous form. My husband and I might have been two stubborn, equally ridiculous people, but somehow, we had created a life that, while out of control, was still ours. The pets had become part of the furniture at this point, constantly underfoot, always in the way, but never truly a bother. I had finally accepted the madness. It wasn't about keeping order. It was about living in the mess and finding joy in the moments between the chaos. My husband and I were learning how to work with it all, laughing when the parrot yelled, dodging when the pig barreled through the kitchen, or following Prickles around as he rolled under the couch. One night, after yet another exhausting day of pet mayhem, my husband turned to me and said, "You know, I've never been more content." I paused for a second, glancing at the pile of animals sprawled across the living room. "Yeah," I agreed. "Me either." It was a weird, unpredictable, and utterly insane life we had built together. But somehow, it was perfect. The pets, the chaos, and the moments of laughter, they had brought us closer than I ever could have imagined. And maybe that was the real reason we did it all. For the chaos. For the madness. For the love. And so, with a sigh, I leaned back on the couch, watching as Prickles curled up next to Sausage, the pig snoring peacefully beside the iguana, and the parrot muttering insults under his breath. In that moment, I realized something important. The mess wasn't something to fix. It was something to embrace.